So we'll talk about what about the good stuff? Let's move on from there. So, welcome. Firstly, Resilience 101. What is it? Are we talking about the same thing? Your parents, my parents' generation, and a lot of people from particularly a more conservative background, from different sets of values, older generations, but also younger generations, depending on how they've been raised, where they've come from. We have really mixed views of what resilience means. And still in our profession, there are a lot of arguments about, well, why are we even talking about this anymore? It's the 21st century. You've got the words wrong. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can look at the exact right definition of whether we should be talking about resilience for individuals anymore. There's a lot of different, we now talk about anti-fragile. We can talk a little bit about that, but it's really important to know semantics is important, mostly because we want to make sure that we're not putting people in buckets and that we're having the same conversations. So resilience, the most common definition that some of you may have heard is the rubber band, right? Can you bounce back to the state that you used to be? So when you think about a rubber band, if you stretch it really tight, you put it under a stressor, and then you let it go, it kind of, in theory, should bounce back to the exact same shape and size and function that it used to have. If you've got a really cheap rubber band where you could get 100 of them at Bunnings for 20 cents and you stretch it and it goes under a stressor and then you let it go and then you get this kind of floppy, flaccid, intermittently, defective version of a rubber band that kind of now just works like a bit of rope. So that is a less resilient rubber band. And the reason that this is the most widely used analogy for resilience is because it really goes to show that it's okay to be stressed. It's okay to not be yourself and to be stretched by a stressor. The trick to resilience is about being able to recover from that and come back to a version of ourselves that is at least as good as it was before, all right? What resilience is not there for is never being stretched. And my analogy for this is the difference between a rubber band and a brick wall. Because if you are a brick wall, what I would call robust, if you are very robust and you are strong and you are tough and I've got this and I can hold on and I can do one more and I can always just keep going a little bit further, you're going to stay standing for a really, really long time until you don't anymore. And when you've got no give and take in your approach to staying strong, then once a brick wall comes down, and it will eventually, it's really hard to build back up. And we don't have a clue where to start. And it's just this crumbled mess, right? And this is one of the reasons why people who experience, burnout and other versions of not being okay in our profession are really surprised to discover that a week off work doesn't fix it. And when we're having really genuine burnout experiences, people take on average sort of 6 months to 3 years to find their way back to some version of how they used to be. And that's because once a brick wall's broken, putting it back together is a really difficult task. So when we talk about resilience, it's really important that we're not imagining robustness. There are a lot of people I talk who pride themselves on what they perceive to be resilience. But when I ask them about it and when they talk about it, what they really mean is toughness. They've got this. I've got this. I'm okay. I'm always okay. I always come out on top. And those are good things to have until they crack, because once they crack, you're in real trouble. So the way to think about this in the reverse is that a lot of people might perceive that having a cry in the staff room is not very resilient, or needing some personal days off work is not very resilient, or not being okay and, telling people about that is not very resilient. When in fact, of course, what we're learning is that sets you up for better resilience. Because if you are the brick wall, if you are constantly being hit, and you're holding strong, you will hold for a long time. And then when it comes crumbling down, you're in real trouble. Whereas if you take the stretch of the rubber band and you're like, not okay for a little while here. But then when that stressor is resolving, you have the skills and the capacity to bounce back because you've taken steps to take care of yourself whilst you were under that strain. And this is why all of the myths about people feeling like they're failing or that they're not as strong or that they don't have as strong a work ethic, because they might not be okay sometimes or because they do take their personal time, that is in fact setting you up with good foundations for resilience. All right. So when we talk about the kind of spectrum of being okay, at one end of people who struggle to be okay, we've got fragile, all right? Up from fragile is robust. It is what particularly most of our parents' generation considered resilience. It was hold or die, hold the line, be tough, be strong. But actually, that's pretty close to fragile because once it goes, it goes. Next up the spectrum of resilience, we have resilient, which is that kind of analogy of your rubber band, the bounce back. And in fact, we've moved beyond that a little bit now. And now we talk a lot about anti-fragile. Anti-fragile effectively meaning you stretch your rubber band and you don't just bounce back to where you were, you bounce back to something better, something stronger. You take in the learnings and the skills that you developed out of that stressor, and you've actually been able to build something with that. Now, anti-fragile is an amazing state to aim for. I tend to encourage people not to necessarily feel like it's what they should always do, because I feel like it puts a lot of pressure on people to see some silver linings and take the positives, which I don't think is always very helpful when you're in the depths of not being okay. So whilst anti-fragile is a wonderful ambition and a lot of us should be aiming to spend some of our time up there, I think it's important not to put too much pressure on yourself to see the positives in every single situation, because that can border slightly on toxic positivity, which we'll talk about a bit later. All right. The other thing to know about this spectrum of fragile, robust, resilient, anti-fragile is that it's not a linear path. Okay, people don't go from being fragile and then suddenly they're anti-fragile. A lot of us go backwards and forwards and round and loop-de-looped, and we have periods where we're feeling really resilient and we have periods where we're feeling really fragile. And there are times of our life where we just have to rely on some robustness to just get through this week or this month. And all of those things can be okay. All right. It's not a straightforward, once you've learned the skills of resilience, you will always be okay. It's really about adapting to the recognition that we are human and sometimes we rely on one end of the spectrum. And as long as we know that the other things are out there and probably more helpful for us to move forward when we're ready, that's a really good place to begin. So remember I said at the beginning about resilience being a team sport? This is where I want to be really, really clear, okay? We are focusing on the individual version of resilience, you as a person and as a professional. I also have courses in creating organizational resilience. What does it look like to set up a company to be resilient for its people and to make your team resilient together so that each individual isn't having to hold too much together? And we know that there's an industry approach that really needs to be focused on, okay? So don't feel like this is all you. This is about controlling what you can control, and you being a resilient individual contributes to a resilient team, but you cannot do that alone. So don't take that pressure on you.